The society we live in today has stereotypical roles for men and women which have been formed through past events. For men, this has made recognising and dealing with mental health issues very difficult due to the way they're expected to behave. Sometimes people look back to the decades like the 1940s with a kind of nostalgia, to a time when men were men, and as a country we had a backbone, in an era of standing up and fighting for what was theirs. 2 world wars set a scene of men being heroes, showing no fear or signs of weakness or emotions. These wars meant that men had no choice but to be strong and brave and fight for their country. Some of these traits have been passed down through generations, and behaviours attached to them can still be expected of men today. However, these horrific traumas that a lot of young men carried, coupled with society's expectations for them to remain emotionless and stoic in the face of pain and tragedy, have caused men of this era to become emotionally repressed, angry, and often violent. The people who now bear the brunt of this repression are most often close family members or people around them. We can see this reflected in pop culture. Action heroes of today are men who show no fear, no pain, and use violence to overcome their adversities. In short, we have created an expectation of how men should relate to emotion, fueled by the violence and hardships of previous generations, from an era where no help was offered to surviving veterans who had to quietly deal with their trauma by ignoring and repressing the feelings of PTSD. Now that more and more men are willing to speak openly about their emotions, we have a greater understanding of how repressing them is affecting their relationships and social lives. Nurturing and sensitivity are typically traits that are associated with femininity. Women are expected to be caring, sensitive, and emotional, and free to express when they are upset or afraid. For men, emotions such as fear, sadness, and embarrassment are actively repressed from an early age. These emotions are healthy and normal reactions to social and physical situations, but instead of being met with compassion and understanding, they are met with hostility when expressed by men. All too often, as children, men are told to man up, suck it up, and don't cry, teaching us from a young age to view these emotions as a sign of weakness. However, instead of raising strong, independent, and self-aware young men, society has instead seen a rise in emotionally unavailable and disconnected men. Men who feel they need to apologise for getting upset and embarrassed to show fear or sadness in the presence of other people. The sad truth is, there is a reason why suicide rates are increasingly growing amongst men, with the Office for National Statistics reporting that men accounted for 3/4 of UK deaths by suicide in 2018, and the NHS reporting that men are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than women. Men are embarrassed to seek help, and instead prefer to try and deal with their issues by themselves. Without the proper expertise and knowledge, this can be extremely difficult for men suffering with trauma, leaving them feeling there is no way out, often keeping everything to themselves, covering it up, or dealing with it on their own. Emotions that are seen as negative and weak are repressed, but over time this results in all emotion, including happiness and joy, being repressed and ignored. This has a very detrimental effect on everyday life, and the world becomes a very bland, emotionless and negative place. Even when things become problematic, men will ignore, pretend and lie to themselves and others. When things get to a critical point and they're being told they need help, it can seem an impossible task to even begin addressing issues. Ego, shame and fear are obstacles that get in the way of admitting there is a problem, let alone seeking help. For most men, therapy means the dreaded question, how do you feel? Either because this opens them up to appear vulnerable, or because they genuinely don't know how they feel due to years of detachment and repressing their emotions. They dread having to sit in front of a therapist and having to tell their story and talk about difficult life events. Men often don't view therapy as a tool to help them better understand their own nervous system and emotions. Instead, they see it as an experience of being made to feel weak and helpless, whilst confessing all their wrongdoings, traumatic experiences and deepest, darkest thoughts. People think that therapy will make things worse, and the process will replicate their earlier experience of feeling exposed, vulnerable and shamed. However, these are all huge misconceptions about therapy, many of which have been brought on by how we see therapy sessions in film and television. A good therapist shouldn't ask you to relive past events and talk extensively about the traumas you've experienced. A therapist who does is not right for you. Therapy is about learning your own patterns of behaviour that are being influenced by past events and being able to control them. We shouldn't see therapy as only seeking help, but rather regaining power and stability.